So I got to start this morning by saying thank you. Thank you first to Brittany and her team for bringing me here and making this happen. And I'm not sure if Molly is still in the room, but I have to say thank you to Molly Chavers, and I actually just spotted her. So Molly is the executive director of Indie Hub, and Molly was actually supposed to be me. Molly was supposed to be on the stage. And when the subject of love, what became the subject for this month, Molly gives us our first example of love by saying that maybe someone else should give the talk. Maybe someone else, after all that's happened in our community, should be the person on the stage. So to Molly, who's right back there, I say a huge thank you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. So in order to talk about love, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through 3 stories. And those 3 stories are going to be personal stories. They're going to be stories about Indianapolis. And they're going to be stories that have happened here, that have happened far away. They're going to touch on different pieces. And there's little anecdotal stories along the way. I love telling stories to get a concept through. My goal is by the end of today, we will have an opportunity to go and spread love. That really is what I'm trying to get us to today, especially after some of the conversations that some of us might have listened to last night. So I say all of that to get us started. I think it's important for you to know some of the things that I love. So I went to law school at the University of Tennessee, and I love Tennessee football. I don't really know what's going on when the game's happening, but I do love what happens at the halftime show because there are outfits and there are flags and there's like a marching thing. I do love Tennessee football, especially when they make the power tee on the field. I do love when we win because the band comes back out and does more stuff. So I love that aspect. I love that aspect of what I got to do at Knoxville. I also love corgis. And you will notice that the corgi is the only thing that's in this slideshow twice, because they might actually be the thing that I love the most in the slideshow, and don't tell that to my fiance. I guess he'll learn when he watches this on video. But we don't own a corgi currently because where we live in the old baseball stadium doesn't allow dogs, despite having the best green space in the city to have a dog. You're not allowed to have a dog. So we hope to have one and hope to someday be able to take a tour through tulips with our corgi. But in the meantime, we have Senna. And Senna is our little buddy. I'll use that term loosely. She is our fashion critic. She lets you know by destroying things that you wear. She lets you know when you need to redecorate by destroying your favorite chair. She also lets you know when to get a new laptop by chewing through your power cord. So she is a wonderful addition to our family, and I do love her despite her challenges. I also love getting people together around a dinner table. I think that incredible things can happen when you bring together people to share in food. And maybe that's because I'm Southern, but I believe that you should always have people around the dinner table, and you should always be serving sweet tea and have something full of carbs on the table. Members of the LGBTQ community don't always agree with me on the carb piece, but I am a big proponent of biscuits. So I love having people around the table. I also love my fiance. We got engaged May last year here in Indianapolis outside of Bakersfield, where we met. We are a rare couple in that we did not meet through any sort of online format. We met by being at the same birthday party, wound up, we lived in the same building, we parked beside each other. All these things happen, right? So you come to Indianapolis and you fall in love, and then you fall in love with this city. So that's a quick snapshot of the things that I love. But I'm not going to spend all day talking about me. I'm going to tell you stories about me and things I've experienced, but ultimately, to do that, we got to go back in time a little bit. So the first story that I want to share is about how love comes from people that sometimes we don't give the benefit of believing that they will love us for who we are. And so I start with my family, and I go back in time to when I was little bitty and I wore overalls. Well, you'll see them a couple of times. Apparently, it was a fashion trend for my mother to put me in overalls. So my mother, you see here, still has that dress. She doesn't wear it. But I started off spending my childhood being loved and am still loved by a fantastic family. I did things that I loved then that I don't love now. Fishing. I did lots of fishing. And I did it in very interesting outfits. So, I did things that I love. We had a sister that came into my life, and we're not quite sure whether or not I loved her. As evidenced by my lack of reaction to her presence. That, of course, has changed. But in the interim, I dealt with my challenge of having a sister by doing more fishing. And I got better at it because I went from catching bluegill and little things you throw back to things you take home and eat. So I really had an interesting childhood of growing up in the South, growing up in the southeast of the country. My mother taught me what RBF is. If you're not sure what that phrase means, it means resting bitch face. But she has this intense face, and I get hit with that all the time, and I'm looking at Chris Moorhead, who's sitting up there, who knows all about this from me. But if I'm not smiling and talking, you get this. And like that doesn't work for anybody. That's never a positive thing. So I learned that from my mother. But she is one of the strongest Southern women you'll ever meet. She is the Southern mom that doesn't really show the tearful emotions. She's very much the you fall down and she says, well, why don't you run some more? Or, you know, when you have a challenge, she challenges you through it instead of trying to be that super like, let me hug you and all that stuff. She's much more the Southern strength that sometimes you see depicted. I think Reba McEntire did a great job of depicting a Southern mother. That is apparently how my mother was too. But this picture shows you my family. And in this picture, you see my father, my mother, my sister, my grandmother on my father's side, and my grandfather on my mother's side. Now, I start with my family because I'm going to tell you the story of coming out in the Southeast and how you find love sometimes when you don't expect it. And when you don't expect it, or you give people the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes that holds you back. So when I was 7 years old, I watched Top Gun, and I saw Tom Cruise in a white t-shirt, and it was over. I knew from that point forward that I was a gay man. I didn't know what that meant at 7 years old in Tennessee because no one talked about it. No one in Tennessee was gay, is the way if you think about it that way. And so in a very small town where I grew up, 8,000 people, there wasn't a single other person that I could ever know that was gay or LGBTQ, or very few people of color. Definitely not people of different religions. And so I grew up in this very kind of insular group of people where you don't really get to learn about who you are and how pieces of your identity might not fit with what that community says you're supposed to be. And so I went through a period in high school where I basically felt that I didn't deserve to exist because I couldn't figure out what it was that I was. Who am I? Why do I feel this about another man? What does that mean? And so I went through this period where I was very hard on myself and had some very dark thoughts and luckily got through it on my own. And that's a theme throughout a lot of this story is I did a lot of this stuff by myself because I didn't really have the support network that I'm happy to say many people have now, that we have progressed to where that exists. But at that time, I graduated high school. I went to undergrad at Murray State in Western Kentucky. And again, very small space as a city, great university, very liberal university. But I still didn't venture into journeying through my own journey of coming out. Instead, I became president of every organization I could, and I rocked it out in the classroom, and I dated the prettiest girl on campus and was like, look, you see this? She's coming to stuff with me. Like, that's what I did. I joined a fraternity where we turned away men who were gay and open about it. And I led that conversation because I was in charge of recruitment. So that's where I was. Now, when I went to law school, I did so in a place where no one knew me. The difference between law school and undergrad is that undergrad, people from high school followed me. I was the first to say I'm going to Murray State. 7 other people decided to follow me there. So when that happened, I didn't venture. I didn't touch on it. I didn't think about it. But then I got to law school, and in my first year, I dated women and I dated men. And I dated women during the day, and I dated men in cities that weren't close to Knoxville because I was still scared about what it would mean if someone saw me with another man. And I was scared about what that would mean for my future. I was scared about what would happen if my parents found out or my family found out. And so in my second year, I came back from a trip abroad to Cambridge, and I said, you know, this is ridiculous. Like, I need to face this. I need to deal with this. And so I started telling people, and the support was fantastic. It was none of that, oh, well, we always knew. That's like one of the things you fear hearing as a gay man and even throughout the whole community. But it was instead we love you. We've loved you regardless of any of those pieces. And we love you for who you are. We love you for that aspect of who you are. And so I had this support network in Knoxville. Family still didn't know. Third year of law school comes around, and I'm right there towards the end of law school. I'm prepping for graduation. I'm prepping to pay the bills that come along with that. And the thing about coming out is that you have this vision in your mind that it's going to be like some of the movie scenes you see where you're sitting down with your parents and it's this great, beautiful, like sunlit room, and you come out and your mom puts her hand on your hand and looks you in the eye, and like all this magical stuff happens. And then sometimes it just happens on the phone, and you don't even know that it's going to happen that way. And that was my experience. My father is incredibly invested in the idea of a budget. And anything that you want to spend, you have to run by him for the budget. You have to talk about it. You have to talk through all of what that means and all of those pieces. And so I knew going into the conversation about the end of law school that I was going to need money, and I was needing some assistance with that because my little job at Express was not going to pay for more than the clothes that I got to wear. And so we're having a conversation, and I entered that conversation with this thought that I was finally in a place in my life where, despite needing money to do graduation, I knew that on the other side of graduation was financial security and stability of my own, to where if my family did what other families had done in the Southeast and have done around the world and have done in this country and still do to this day, told me that they did not love me, that I would be okay. And I waited until I was able to be okay without their support before I told them. That was always in my head. So I'm on the phone, I just finished tennis practice. I'm asking my dad for money, and he says to me, and for whatever reason, I guess because this moment is one of those crucial moments in your life, but he says to me, you need to recognize who we are and what we're capable of affording. Now, some background on my family is that we are a working class family. My father has worked maintenance his entire life. My mother is a hairstylist and truly believes in the bigger the hair, the closer to God. And I grew up in this scenario. This was my life. This was my family. And so he says that to me, and for whatever reason, it triggered, this is when I need to say it. And so I said, you need to get Mom on the phone. And he's like, why? And I said, just get her on the phone. So she gets on the phone, and her first question is, why am I on the phone? And I say, well, I need to tell you and Dad something. And so I pause for a second, and that pause that goes a little bit too long and makes you uncomfortable, that pause happened right there because I was struggling with saying the words. Because for me to say the words in that moment meant that I was going to affirm to the people that had raised me since I was born that I was gay. It meant owning it. It meant accepting that that was who I was. It meant continuing the journey of actually loving myself to be capable of loving someone else. And so I said it. I said, I'm gay. And my voice broke as I said it. I began to cry. And my father, without missing a beat, says, we love you. And my father, who's been raised in rural Tennessee his entire life, said, we love you. And he did that in a time when it meant for him having to go to the times when he goes to the little restaurant in our hometown and has coffee and having to answer questions that people were going to ask and having to deal with bigotry that was going to come his way, because it has. And he accepted that in that moment. Now, my mother was silent. And in my head, because I was entering this conversation with doubts about what could happen, I feared that silence meant that something terrible was coming. And I braced for it. And as I said, my mother, who's the strong Southern woman that doesn't cry, began to cry. And then I began to think, oh goodness, she's crying because she blames herself. But instead, she was crying because she said to me, I'm crying because I wasn't able to be there for you, and you had to do this by yourself. And so in that moment, as we all started crying, right? Everyone's crying at that point. She tells me of how my sister had relationships, and she'd never been able to have talks with me about relationships because I didn't have them. I was too busy, is what I would say. But the reality was that I did, and I processed through them on my own. And my mother always wanted to be able to do that with me. And so what I learned from this story, and what I hope to give the takeaway here, is that sometimes we have to give people the benefit of the doubt that they can love us for who we are and for what we do. And sometimes we will make mistakes and we will misstep, But if love is truly at the root of the relationships we share with people, we will overcome those pieces. Now, the thing about coming out is that journey doesn't stop, ever. So me walking into this room, you might have assumed that I was gay because there was a rainbow poster of people and we're talking about love and I'm president of Pride, right? Like there's a lot there that you're like, this guy's probably gay and I'm dressed very nicely. So there's pieces like that, you're like, this guy's probably gay. But until I said it, you didn't actually know. You didn't fully know. And so there's a constant confirmation. And sometimes that happens with little ones who ask questions. And so in this picture is my best friend that I grew up with. We were next door neighbors. She was the love of my life for the longest time, still is, actually. One of my favorite people in the world. And she married a fantastic man. They're both part of my wedding. And this is their daughter. They have a son as well. And little Haley is a fascinating child. She is beautiful. She is brilliant. She loves cicadas. She loves collecting cicada husks, like putting them in bags and putting them beside her bed. She loves cicadas. She asked if she could put a cicada on the dress she's wearing at the wedding. I've tried to find a cicada brooch. They don't exist. So she is a fantastic, fantastic child. And so in this picture on the right, we're at a University of Tennessee football game. We've just finished watching the band. And we get ready to leave the game, and I was there with her and her parents, her little brother, and my best friend from law school, who is my friend Tiffany, who's about this tall. She's 4'11" 3/4, and the most important part of those numbers. And we're walking away from the game, and Haley says to me, "Is that your girlfriend?" Now, she's met my partner. She calls my partner Dr. Eric. She says, "Where's Dr. Eric?" anytime he's not around. So she knows he's something in my life. And she asks if Tiffany is who I'm going to marry. And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "Well, is Tiffany your mom?" And Tiffany goes, "No," because Tiffany is my age, so definitely not my mom. And then Haley looks at me and she says, "Well, then who are you going to marry?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to marry Dr. Eric. You know him." And she gets this puzzled look on her face. And the innocence of a child, she looks back to me and she says, "It's okay for you to marry a prince." Now, I luckily was wearing the sunglasses you see in this picture because I start bawling while she just skips along and has no recollection of what she just said to me or the impact of what she said. And then the beauty of children is that they will say fantastic things like that, and then they'll turn around and ask you who's wearing the dress at the wedding. So it's just. It's amazing the conversation you have with children. Now, the final piece to this story, and before I move into the second one, is that progress happens. So my mother, who I came out to, has been an incredible supporter and an ally in an area of the country that is not, she has to come out as an ally. And her ally nature pops up in different ways, and one of those is helping your son look like Effie Trinket for the Bag Lady bus tour. My mother made the dress that I'm wearing. I'm the butterfly one, in case you can't recognize me. My mother made the dress that I'm wearing, despite the fact that we look like you might have walked into the wrong neighborhood, given the facial expressions we're making. We're practicing our RBF. She also made my partner's outfit. And she did all of this without asking, because she asked me what I was doing for Halloween. I said, "Well, we're doing this charity thing." She said, "Tell me more about it." I said, "Well, the Bag Lady Bus Tour raises funds for the DEFA Fund here in Indianapolis that supports people with HIV/AIDS when they can't support themselves and in some of the emergency situations they find themselves in." And she said, "Well, I want to help you. What can I do?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to look like this." And she goes, "Well, let's go get fabric." And next thing you know, I have a dress. Next thing you know, we're working together to glue butterflies onto this dress. To me, that speaks to progress. It speaks to the idea that people can show you they love you, can learn about you as a person, and then figure out ways to support you continuously as you continue that journey. So the second story, as we transitions into talking about Pride and talking about Orlando and what Indianapolis did in response to those events and in response to the tragedy that we had to overcome in Orlando and are still overcoming. So in this picture, if you've never been to Indy Pride, this is what 110,000 people look like outside of this building, all throughout American Legion Mall. And when we were celebrating Pride this year, it was June 11th. And we had En Vogue on the stage. We had a fantastic crowd. It was the surface of the sun hot, but it was a beautiful day. And we spent that evening until 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, picking up trash, tearing down tables, tearing down canopies. And the thing that I've had to process, and as I've thought about Orlando, is that while Orlando was happening, we were complaining as volunteers about what we were having to do for work. So while our brothers and sisters in Orlando, the 49 individuals that fought for their lives and unfortunately lost that battle, while they were doing that, I was complaining. And that is a perspective thing, and people have said to me, "You're too hard on yourself for that." And I say, well, am I? If I got away from complaining all the time and I got to a space where I was thinking about how do I exhibit love all the time and love what I'm doing to where it overcomes the barriers of having to get it done at 2:30 in the morning, would I have been complaining at that point? And I've sort of beat myself up on that. But this part is definitely not about me. This part of the story is about what Indianapolis was able to do to show support for members of our community, the LGBTQ community, that we didn't even know, that were hurting or had been killed in an act of senseless violence. In this picture, you see 49 individuals. And a common theme among them is that many of them identified as LGBTQ. Others were allies. But other pieces within that is that many of them had partners. Many of them were on the verge of starting a family. But many of them are also members of the Latino and Latina community. And that intersectionality of our identity is so important and critical to the conversation of figuring out how to love other people, because there's so many different facets to who we are, and we have to figure out how we love all those pieces. Now, when Orlando happened, I woke up to my phone going crazy. Someone had called enough times that the do not disturb on an iPhone was overcome. And it was a reporter, and luckily I didn't answer because I didn't know what was going on, and left a voicemail that told me what was going on and asked what our response was going to be. And immediately, our team of volunteers set to work on making a vigil happen. And within 7 hours of that phone conversation or that voicemail, a vigil occurred. And so in this picture, you see that you have the crowd gathered to enjoy the main stage of Pride, but you have the same crowd and many of the same people gathered less than 24 hours later to grieve and begin the mourning process and to show love and support for people they didn't even know, but people that they related to, because those people could have been them. And so the thing about this 2-week period is that whenever you're going through a tragedy, you try to think of the silver lining. You try to think of the pieces that are within that you're supposed to learn. How do you learn? How do you take things away? How do you grow? How do you move through this process? And we all grieve differently. And so as an organization, we decided that we were going to try to provide as many opportunities as we could for people to express what they were feeling and to express love for the community in Orlando. And one of the first things that happened was during that vigil, Rima, who's the executive director of the Muslim Alliance, she spoke. Now, I want you to be in her shoes for a second. You're a member of the Muslim faith on the same day that a member of your faith and the radicalism of it has killed members of the community you're speaking to. And this woman had the courage to stand behind a podium and speak a message of love. And in that message, she asked for members of the Muslim faith to break the Ramadan fast and go donate blood. And there's things like that happen, those moments where you process, and then you watch your community rise and applaud and cheer for the woman who is standing on that stage, who they could have very easily been scared of until that moment. And that was love. Because she was having a hard time getting through it, the community stood with her to get her through that talk. She's the only person they gave a standing ovation to. And I think she was the only one of us in that room deserving of it because of her ability to speak to love. Another person that showed love during this time was our mayor. Now, the beauty of our mayor is that I've learned he's a selfless person. And I've learned that probably if he was sitting in here hearing me say this now, he might feel embarrassed about it because he didn't want to be the center of any attention during the 2 weeks of experience that we had in responding to Orlando. Now, this picture was taken before the tragedy. Our mayor and his wife became members of Indy Pride. And so they're actually voting members of our organization. Let that one sink in for a second. And in doing so, we created an opportunity for me to reach out to him when things are going on. He came to our vigil. He sat in the front row. He entered from a door in the back of the room. He exited through the same door. He didn't try to speak to media. He didn't really speak to people that were there except those closely around him. He told me, I don't want this to be about me. I don't want my presence here to distract from what's going on and what the conversation needs to be. And so I didn't get to sit down with him until we were hosting the blood drive. Now, the thing about a blood drive being hosted by Indy Pride is that the current regulations in and of themselves are discriminatory toward our community. Men who have sex with men cannot currently donate blood, regardless of any sort of background that they have. If you've had sex with a man and you're a man, you cannot donate blood. So what that meant was that if in order for us to do a blood drive and to get support, we were going to have to pull from our allies and get them to rally behind a cause and come out and support us. And our mayor did just that. And he did it in a way, again, discreet. And I didn't learn he was there until someone was like, hey, the mayor's here. And I was like, okay. And then I went and found him. And so while he was sitting waiting to give blood, I sat down with him. And I talked to him about why he was there. And he told me. And he told me about the need for support. And I told him my story of Tennessee and how I never envisioned that I would ever sit down with an elected official and be able to have a conversation and thank him for supporting my community. And there was power in that. There was power in that conversation. And we both shared some tears there as we talked through things. But I think that we are blessed as a city to have individuals like Mayor Hogsett and even Mayor Ballard, who came out to that event as well, that show support for diverse and inclusive communities. And it's so important for that. Now, love manifests in different ways. Love sometimes is spoken. Love sometimes is action. Love sometimes is simply being present and being able to listen. And for our organization and for the community, love was an opportunity to give back. And one of the ways in which we can show love is the giving of our personal treasure and the sacrificing of the money that we have to help others. And so this picture depicts, it was the night of the Bag Lady benefit to support Orlando. And in the center of that picture is Axel Andrews. And I'm not going to tell you his whole story, because I think it's better for you to go read it yourself. Rolling Stone did an article on Axel. But his story is that he survived the Orlando tragedy. He was in Pulse. He's a performer from Pulse. He was in a dressing room where he barricaded himself. And he and the others in that room pushed an air conditioning unit out of the wall to be able to climb out and survive. And less than 2 weeks later, he came to Indianapolis, didn't ask for any money to come here. We supported him on our own choosing to do so. But he didn't ask for anything. And he came and he celebrated with us, because this night was a night of celebration. If we think of the grieving process, this was one of the final events we did. Our goal was to get to a point, and the Bag Lady's goal was to get to a point to where they could help the community start to celebrate and move forward. And in this night, we finished out our round of collecting donations. And as a result, Indianapolis as a community, not just Indy Pride, not just the LGBTQ community, but the entire community was able to send over $26,000 to Orlando. That is a sign of love. And so when we think about what love is, and we think about how we show it, and how we express it, I think it's so incredibly important. And while this talk is focused on LGBTQ pieces, because that's my identity, as a white, cisgender, gay male, my identity and what I know is what I'm able to talk about. But what I can tell you is that we as individuals have to figure out a way to be able to think in the shoes of our people that don't look like us and don't believe like us. There are members of our Black community that are hurting as a result of the systemic racism that continues to permeate our society. There are members of our law enforcement community that are also hurting because of things that happen to them, tragedies that have happened in Dallas. But there's tragedies across every piece of this. And I by no means am making an all lives matter pitch, because I don't believe in that movement. What I do believe in is affirming who people are, listening to what they say, and trying our best with what we've got and the tools we have to understand what they're saying to us. Because when we can do that, and I look at this crowd and I see many people that outwardly present as I do, when we do that, we gain an opportunity to build relationships, and relationships lead to love, and love conquers hate. So the final story I'm going to tell you is one that happens in the most unexpected place McDonald's on 16th Street and Meridian. Now, if you have been to that McDonald's, you may or may not have gotten your order wrong. They may have decided that you were going to have it their way. You may have also, if you've had my experience, needed a snack late at night after being out on Mass Avenue and being told that despite the fact they're open 24 hours, they are closed for cleaning. And I don't know what that means, but okay, we'll go to White Castle. So it was 9 days after Orlando, and I was headed to a meeting, and I'm the type that has to eat like every 5 minutes. Like I'm already hungry. Like standing up here as this talk goes on, I get hungry, right? So I'm on the way to this meeting and I don't know whether or not they're gonna have food, which makes me nervous. So I decide to stop at McDonald's, which also makes me nervous, especially this one, to get a snack. And so I'm there, I'm in line, I'm ready to order my number 2 plain. The fact that I have my order memorized is sad. And so I'm standing in line, and I'm going to lay out the room for you. So in front of me is a gentleman that if I could describe him, he would meet the description of someone that I would never think would have been thinking about LGBTQ individuals or thinking about the struggles we have. That's important to remember about him. He's going to be a very important piece of this story. In front of him is someone who I don't even remember who was ordering food. They were in my way between me and food. And then at the front is the cashier. Cashier is African American. The race of the cashier is important for this story. And to the left is an individual, a white man and his girlfriend, who had already ordered their food and were waiting. And so I'm standing there and I'm just kind of playing on my phone, pre-Pokemon. And I'm standing there and I'm just kind of not really paying attention. And I notice this language coming from the man who's waiting for his food. And he's getting angrier and angrier. And his body language, he's starting to move, and he's starting to get kind of, you can tell something's going on. And he begins to call the cashier racial names. And I am standing there, and I'm hearing that, and that makes me uncomfortable. But then he progresses to calling the cashier a faggot bitch. And I say that word because I need you to feel what that word makes me feel. That word makes me feel fear. That word makes me scared. That word makes me get anxiety. That word makes me start analyzing my surroundings. It makes me think about, do I need to leave where I am? And in that moment, it also froze me. And that moment was the first time that I had processed what Orlando meant. Because it was the first time that I was in a situation where an individual was saying that he would progress to saying that he was going to hurt the cashier because the cashier was a faggot bitch. And that he was going to meet him outside and he was going to stab him. And as I began analyzing all these pieces, I noticed that he does in fact have a knife in his pocket. And so my brain is just overwhelmed, and I'm standing there probably not with my RBF, but instead like this, freaked out. And I watch him as he lunges for the cashier. His girlfriend pulls him back, and they leave. And I watch him get in his car, and I make sure he doesn't come back into the restaurant. Because at that point, I don't know what he might have had if he'd gone to his car. The car pulls off, and he leaves. And I'm still standing there, and I'm just sort of staring off into space. And then I feel a hand on my shoulder. And I said the man in front of me was important, because the man in front of me puts his hand on my shoulder and says, I know you. And I look at him, and I don't know him. And he says, I recognize you because you've been doing a lot of media interviews about what happened in Orlando. And what I need you to know is that your community shouldn't have to hear things like that man just said. And I want to make sure you're okay. Now, I don't know what I said to him because I started crying. But he looked me in the eye, and his eyes watered up, and he took his Big Mac, and he left. And in that moment, that to me was love in an unexpected place. It's love that you don't have to give. Nothing said that man had to turn and ask if I was okay. Nothing said that man had to turn and affirm me and who I am and acknowledge that I might have been impacted by what was being said. And what is even more important is that he was an African American. And he didn't process through the first part of it, didn't look for support there. He looked to support me in that moment. And I, unfortunately, didn't have the wherewithal to support him back, because neither of us should have had to hear what we heard in that moment. But what I learned from that is that if we go out of our way, if we take steps as individuals, and this is kind of the big takeaway today, if we can show that we love people, and we can affirm who they are as individuals, and we can acknowledge them, we can root out the hate that is being spread in this world. I truly believe that when we as a people unite through love, we are able to overcome any level of hate that is being espoused by anyone on any stage. And so as I think about what my goal is in a Creative Morning Talk, is that I hope you all creatively think of ways today to show that you love other people. And maybe that's simply telling them, but it could be just as easy as asking, are you okay? And so I leave you with a quote, and anyone who knows who John Wooden is, obviously a famous Hoosier, but the greatest word in the whole dictionary is love. And I just ran across this quote when doing a program a couple of weekends ago, but it is so true. If we truly believed this quote, and we truly believe that love, even when it makes us uncomfortable, until we are able to go through the uncomfortableness, we'll never be comfortable in being loving to others. If we can love others, and if we can demonstrate that, love will win. Thank you.